At a quiet McDonald's, two intimidating bikers target and harass a black woman eating alone, cruelly mocking her weight and hurling racist insults, believing they've found an easy victim. What they don't realize is that her husband, one of the most feared Marines in his unit, is merely steps away inside the restaurant ordering food. As he emerges to find his wife being tormented, these bikers are about to learn they've picked the wrong person to terrorize. They've unknowingly provoked a warrior who fought battles so fierce they would get nightmares just hearing about them, carrying more scars than they could ever bear. Their cruel actions would soon have bitter consequences, reaching far beyond anything they could have imagined. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today and make sure to subscribe. The scorching afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the train station as Darius Carter, a tall, well-built black man in his 50s, stepped off the train. His weathered face bore the marks of 2 decades of military service, etched with lines of experience and determination. Dressed in his crisp United States Marine Corps uniform, he cut an imposing figure as he made his way through the bustling station, his military bag slung over his shoulder. The heat was oppressive, causing beads of sweat to form on Darius's forehead as he navigated through the crowd. The familiar weight of his bag, filled with the essentials of a Marine's life, was a comforting presence amidst the chaos of civilian life. As he approached the exit, his eyes scanned the area, a habit ingrained by years of military training. Outside the station, the hot air hit him like a wall, but Darius's attention was immediately drawn to a familiar face in the crowd. There, standing by the exit, was his wife, Monique Carter. At 46, Monique's face showed the wear of worry and stress, her frame noticeably heavier than when he had last seen her. Despite the changes, her eyes lit up with joy as they met his. "Darius!" Monique called out, her voice filled with emotion. She rushed towards him, her arms outstretched. Darius's stoic expression softened as he embraced his wife, feeling the warmth of her body against his uniform. "Monique," he said softly, his deep voice rumbling in his chest. "It's good to be home." They held each other for a long moment, oblivious to the bustle of the station around them. When they finally parted, Monique's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "It's been so long," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've missed you so much." Darius nodded, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "I've missed you too," he replied, his voice gruff with emotion. He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I'll be off service for a few months," he explained. "Doctor's orders, physical rest." Monique's eyes widened with concern. "What happened?" "Are you all right?" Darius hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I took a bullet," he said matter-of-factly. "Non-life-threatening, grazed my ribs, had minor surgery, but I'm fine now. Just need some time to recover fully." "Ah," Monique gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Darius," she breathed. I don't know what to say. I'm just glad you're okay." She shook her head as if to clear it. "We should talk more in the car, and I want to see that scar of yours, mister." Darius nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Let's go then," he said, adjusting the strap of his bag on his shoulder. They made their way to the parking lot, the heat shimmering off the asphalt. Monique led him to their car, an older model that had seen better days but was still running strong. As they approached, Darius spoke up. "I'll drive," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Monique looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "All right," she agreed, handing him the keys. "But don't push yourself too hard, okay?" Darius grunted in acknowledgement as he loaded his bag into the trunk. He then settled into the driver's seat, the familiar feel of the steering wheel under his hands a welcome sensation. As he started the engine, Monique turned to him, her eyes serious. "Now let me see that scar," she said, her tone brooking no argument. Darius sighed but complied, pulling his uniform shirt up to reveal the healing scar on his ribs. Monique's fingers gently traced the mark, her touch feather-light. "Oh, Darius," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "How long are you off service?" 3 months, he replied, rebuttoning his shirt. but I'm ready to be summoned if anything requires my presence. Monique nodded, her hand still resting on his chest. We should really use this time to catch up, she said softly. I've missed you so much, Darius. More than you know. Darius covered her hand with his own, giving it a gentle squeeze. I've missed you too, Monique, he said, his voice low and sincere. We'll make the most of this time, I promise. With that, he put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the train station behind. As they merged into traffic, Darius glanced at his wife, noting the changes in her appearance since he'd last seen her. How are you doing? He asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. How's your condition? The hypothyroidism. Monique sighed, her hand unconsciously going to her neck. It's been a challenge, she admitted. The medication helps, but... She trailed off, looking out the window. Darius frowned, his eyes flicking between her and the road. You've gained more weight, he observed, his tone neutral. Is the medication not working as well as it should? Maybe we should go to the doctor again, get your dosage adjusted. Monique turned back to him, a sad smile on her face. It's not just the hypothyroidism, she explained. The stress and worry during your deployment, it might have made things worse. I've been taking my medication regularly, going to my checkups, but... But what? Darius prompted gently. Monique hesitated, her eyes darting away. It's just neighborhood drama, she said finally. Every year it feels more difficult to live peacefully. Darius's frown deepened. What kind of neighborhood drama? Were people giving you a hard time because of how you look? Monique shook her head. No, well, yes, some did, but that's not what I meant. It's complicated. Every month someone in the neighborhood gets into trouble and needs help. More and more neighbors are leaving and the new ones moving in. I just feel lonelier. What's causing all this? Darius asked, his military instincts kicking in. Monique bit her lip. I've heard neighbors complaining about a gang, but... She trailed off, then quickly changed the subject. Our house has been safe, though. No one's bothered me. Darius's grip tightened on the steering wheel. A gang? Monique, why didn't you tell me about this before? I didn't want to worry you, she said softly. And talking about it, it just makes me stressed. Can we discuss it later? Please? Darius nodded reluctantly. All right, he agreed, but we will talk about this. Now that I'm here for 3 months, we'll work together to improve your health and keep you safe. I promise you that, Monique. As they drove on, the familiar streets of their neighborhood came into view. Darius couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed more than he realized during his absence. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders once more, not for his fellow Marines this time, but for his wife and his community. The car hummed along the familiar streets of their neighborhood, the scenery a mix of nostalgia and subtle changes that Darius couldn't quite put his finger on. The conversation about the neighborhood's troubles had left a heavy silence in the air, broken only by the soft purr of the engine and the occasional rustle of Monique shifting in her seat. Darius glanced at his wife, noting the worried crease between her brows. He cleared his throat, deciding to lighten the mood. You know, he began, his deep voice rumbling in the confines of the car, I'm actually pretty hungry after that journey. How about we grab a snack together? Monique's face fell slightly. Oh, I'm sorry, Darius. I didn't have a chance to prepare any food this morning. I was so excited about picking you up. I completely forgot. Darius waved off her apology with a small smile. No problem at all. There's a McDonald's near our neighborhood, isn't there? We could make a quick stop there. Monique hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay, she agreed, a light chuckle escaping her lips. Though my hypothyroidism won't like it much, I'll just order a little something to have with my medicine. Darius frowned slightly, concern etching his features. We could find another place if you'd prefer. Something healthier, maybe? But Monique shook her head, a wistful smile playing on her lips. No, it's been a long time since I had McDonald's. A little bit would be fine. She paused, her eyes meeting his. I've been trying to live a healthier lifestyle, especially this year, trying to control my weight. But now that you're home, A little celebration and one cheat meal wouldn't hurt, right? Darius nodded, relief evident in his posture. All right then, McDonald's it is. He navigated the car through the familiar streets, memories flooding back with each turn. The neighborhood had changed subtly over the years, a new coat of paint here, a renovated storefront there. But the essence remained the same. As they approached the golden arches of McDonald's, Darius felt a strange mix of nostalgia and unease. It had been so long since he'd indulged in such a simple civilian pleasure. Pulling into the parking lot, Darius found a spot close to the entrance. He turned off the engine and stepped out, the heat of the day immediately enveloping him, swallowing the last traces of the car's cool air on his skin. He walked around to Monique's side, offering his hand to help her out of the car. She took it with a grateful smile, and together they made their way towards the restaurant. The interior of the McDonald's was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the heat outside. The lunch rush had passed, leaving the restaurant in a lull. Darius glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:45 p.m. His eyes scanned the area, a habit born from years of military service. He spotted an empty table outside the restaurant. "We could sit there after we order," he said, pointing to the table. Monique nodded in agreement. They entered the restaurant, joining the short queue at the counter. There were only a few customers ahead of them, and they were served in no time. Darius gestured for Monique to order first. "I'll have a cheeseburger, a medium fries, and a cold water, please," Monique said to the cashier, her voice tinged with a hint of guilt. Darius stepped forward. "And I'll have a double quarter-pounder with cheese, large fries, large Coke, and an apple pie," he ordered, his voice confident and clear. As the cashier rang up their order, Monique turned to Darius, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "I thought you said it was just a snack," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. Darius chuckled, a rare sound that warmed Monique's heart. "I guess I just realized how starving I am," he admitted, "and it's been a while since I had McDonald's. Couldn't resist." They paid for their meal and stepped aside to wait for their order. Darius's eyes continually scanned the restaurant, a habit he couldn't shake even in this peaceful setting. Monique noticed his alertness and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Relax, honey," she said softly. "You're home now. You're safe here." Darius nodded, but the tension didn't fully leave his shoulders. Something about the neighborhood troubles Monique had mentioned earlier nagged at him, keeping him on edge even in this familiar setting. As they waited, the smell of fries and burgers filled the air, making Darius's stomach growl audibly. Monique giggled, the sound light and carefree, reminding Darius of easier times. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax, to enjoy this simple pleasure with his wife. Darius and Monique made their way outside to the table he had pointed out earlier. The afternoon sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, creating a mirage-like effect that reminded Darius of his deployments in desert terrains. Just as they exited the restaurant and approached their chosen table, the roar of motorcycle engines filled the air. Two bikers, their leather vests adorned with menacing insignias, pulled into the parking lot. The machines growled to a stop near Darius and Monique's table, the riders dismounting with practiced ease. Darius instinctively stepped slightly in front of Monique, his body tensing as the bikers approached. They were both large men, their faces weathered and hard, with eyes that spoke of seen too much and cared too little. "This table's reserved for us," one of the bikers growled, his voice rough from years of smoking and shouting over motorcycle engines. Darius stood his ground, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and unwavering gaze. "We were here first," he said calmly but firmly, "and at McDonald's you can't reserve tables. There are plenty of other empty tables nearby. I suggest you kindly leave us alone and find another spot." The bikers exchanged glances, their eyes raking over Monique's physique and Darius's muscular build. A tense moment passed, the air thick with unspoken threats and the promise of violence. Finally, one of the bikers scoffed, spitting on the ground near Darius's feet. Without a word, they moved to a nearby empty table, not far from where Darius and Monique stood. They sat down heavily, the chairs creaking under their weight. One of them pulled out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, placing them on the table with deliberate slowness before lighting up. Darius remained standing, his eyes never leaving the bikers as they settled in. He could feel Monique's hand on his arm, her grip tight with anxiety. Through the glass door of the restaurant, he saw that Monique's order was ready, her number blinking on the monitor inside. "Your food's ready," he said softly to Monique. "Why don't you go get it? I'll wait here." Monique hesitated, her eyes darting between Darius and the bikers. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Darius nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. "I'll be fine, go on." With obvious reluctance, Monique made her way back into the restaurant. Darius watched her go, then turned his attention back to the bikers. They were watching him too, their gazes challenging and filled with barely concealed hostility. The tension in the air was palpable as Darius stood his ground, his military training evident in his alert posture and steady gaze. He knew that backing down now would only invite more trouble, so he met their stares unflinchingly, silently communicating that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Monique returned moments later, carefully balancing her tray of food. Darius helped her set it down on their table, his eyes never fully leaving the bikers. Just then, his own order number lit up inside the restaurant. "I'll be right back," he told Monique, his voice low and reassuring. "Stay here, and if they give you any trouble, shout for me immediately. Understood?" Monique nodded, her eyes wide with worry. "Be careful, Darius," she whispered. As Darius made his way back into the restaurant, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. The neighborhood troubles Monique had mentioned earlier suddenly felt very real and very close. He quickened his pace, determined to get back to his wife as soon as possible. Little did he know that in the few moments he would be gone, the situation outside would escalate rapidly, testing not only his protective instincts, but also the very fabric of the community he had returned to. As Darius disappeared into the restaurant, Monique found herself alone at the table, acutely aware of the biker's presence nearby. She tried to focus on her food, picking up a fry and taking a small bite. The salt and grease hit her tongue, a guilty pleasure she hadn't indulged in for months. Despite her attempt to appear calm, Monique couldn't help but glance towards the bikers. They noticed her looking, and grins spread across their faces, a predatory gleam in their eyes. Monique quickly averted her gaze, her heart rate picking up as she silently willed Darius to return quickly. The bikers, sensing her fear and seizing the opportunity presented by Darius's absence, stood up from their table. Monique could hear the scrape of their chairs against the concrete, the heavy thud of their boots as they approached. She kept her eyes down, hoping against hope that they would pass by, but the footsteps stopped right next to her table. "Well, well," one of the bikers drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "No wonder you look like that when this is all you eat all day." Monique flinched at the cruel words, her cheeks burning with shame and anger. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself, but fear kept her silent. The other biker reached out, snatching a handful of fries from her tray. "Mind if we have a taste?" he sneered, shoving the fries into his mouth. "Someone your size shouldn't be eating all this alone." His companion, emboldened by this act, made a grab for her burger. This was too much for Monique. In a burst of courage, she slapped his hand away, her voice rising in a shout. "Stay away! Go back to your seat. That's a lady's meal. Show some respect." The bikers laughed at her. "A lady? You think of yourself as a lady? I'd say a real lady should look pleasant and well cared for, not like a whale." Then their amusement quickly soured into something darker. They stepped closer, towering over Monique, their menacing postures making their intentions clear. Her heart pounded, breath hitching in short, panicked gasps. She was about to scream for help when suddenly a familiar voice sliced through the tension. "Get away from her!" Darius had returned, his voice low and dangerous. He hadn't brought his tray with him. He must have left it inside in his rush to get back to Monique. His eyes were hard as he stared down the bikers, his body tense and ready for action. The bikers turned to face him, clearly not impressed by his intervention. "You got a problem, Marine," one of them sneered, tapping the insignia on his vest. "Or should I say a mock Marine? Do you know who we are?" Darius's eyes narrowed as he recognized the symbol, a mask-like design on both sides of their chests. He had seen it before in newspaper articles about drug-related crimes and violence, but he wasn't intimidated. "I don't care who you are," Darius said, his voice steady and firm. "This is your last warning. Get away from our table and my wife, or I'm calling the police." The bikers laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Look at this guy," one of them jeered, "wearing a cosplay costume of a Marine but still threatening to call the cops at the smallest dispute." The other biker reached out and grabbed another fry from Monique's tray, making a show of eating it slowly. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You and your lady friend are going to leave this restaurant now. Leave the food for us. Otherwise, things are going to get ugly around here." Darius had heard enough. In a swift motion, he stepped forward and pushed both bikers away from the table, his strength catching them off guard. "You want to know my name?" he growled, his patience wearing thin. "I'm just as real a Marine as you are a bandit. How about you tell me yours first, or are you too much of a coward to own up to your bullying behavior?" The bikers stumbled back, surprised by Darius's strength and courage. They exchanged glances, clearly not used to being challenged so directly. For a moment, it seemed like they might back down, but then their faces hardened once more. "We don't care who you are. Real or not, you're making a big mistake, Marine," one of them snarled. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Darius stood his ground, his eyes never leaving the bikers. "I think it's you who doesn't understand the situation," he replied, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Now, I'm going to ask you one last time to leave us alone. Or would you prefer to explain your actions to the police?" The tension in the air was palpable as the two sides faced off, neither willing to back down. Monique watched with a mixture of fear and pride, her heart racing as she witnessed her husband standing up to these intimidating men. The standoff continued, the air thick with tension. The bikers, momentarily taken aback by Darius's show of strength and resolve, quickly regained their bravado. They exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them, before turning back to Darius with sneers on their faces. "You know what?" one of them said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm curious. What's someone like you doing with a wife like this?" He gestured dismissively at Monique, who shrank back in her seat, her face burning with humiliation. Darius's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides, but before he could respond, the biker continued, his voice taking on a false friendliness. "There's still many more beautiful fish in the sea, you know," he said, grinning widely. "We've got girls at our place, white, blonde. If you want to be friends, you could join us. Ditch the baggage, have some real fun." Darius felt a surge of rage course through him. His voice when he spoke was low and dangerous. "That's enough," he growled. "You're disrespecting my wife, and this is way out of line." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling 911 right now," he announced, his finger hovering over the keypad. The bikers' mocking laughter subsided immediately. They exchanged another glance, this one tinged with uncertainty. For a moment, it seemed like they might push further, but then they backed away, spitting on the ground before retreating to their bikes. As they mounted their motorcycles, they revved the engines loudly, sending a cloud of exhaust smoke billowing towards Darius and Monique. Monique coughed, waving her hand in front of her face to clear the air. The bikers roared out of the parking lot, but not before one of them called out, "This isn't over, Marine, and you too, Lady Whale." As the sound of their engines faded into the distance, Darius turned to Monique. Her face was pale and she was visibly shaken. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Monique nodded weakly. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "But I've lost my appetite." Darius looked at the food on the table. Monique's fries were scattered, and her burger had grown cold. He sighed. "We can't just throw all this away," he said. "I'll go grab my tray from inside. We'll eat what we can, okay?" Monique nodded again, forcing a small smile. "Okay," she agreed. As Darius went back into the restaurant to retrieve his food, Monique sat at the table, her mind reeling from what had just happened. When Darius returned with his tray, they tried to enjoy their meal together, But the atmosphere had changed. The carefree reunion they had hoped for had been tainted by this encounter. Darius ate with his usual efficiency, clearly famished from his journey. Monique, on the other hand, picked at her food, taking small bites of her now cold burger and soggy fries. After a few moments of silence, Monique spoke up. "This is what I meant," she said softly, her eyes meeting Darius's. "About the problems and drama in the neighborhood. It's not the safe place it used to be anymore, not like when we first moved here 20 years ago." Darius nodded, his expression grave. "I can see that now," he said. "Why didn't you tell me about this before? We still communicated when I was on duty, through phone calls and letters." Monique sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't want to worry you," she admitted. "And those gang members, they never troubled me before, maybe because I rarely went out of home except for the weekly grocery errand." Darius frowned, understanding dawning on his face. "No wonder you feel stressed at home," he said. "You should feel safe leaving the house in this neighborhood, Monique. You should be able to build friendships, socialize with the neighbors." Monique glanced down at herself, a look of self-consciousness crossing her face. Darius understood immediately. "Hey," he said gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We're going to work on this together, okay? We'll improve your medical condition and we'll make life in this neighborhood more pleasant and safe. I could even get in touch with the local police. They'd listen to me because of my military status." Monique squeezed his hand, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You always know how to make me feel safe and calm," she said. "Thank you, Darius." She paused, hesitation clear on her face before she continued. "I'm sorry if my appearance embarrassed you. What those bikers said about someone like you with a wife like me, it must be what everyone's thinking when they look at us." Darius's face softened, his grip on her hand tightening. "Monique," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I've known you for more than 30 years. You used to be beautiful both inside and outside, and you still are to me today. Your medical condition is just another challenge in our marriage, something for us to work through together." Monique's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be honest with me, Darius." Darius leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I am being honest," he insisted. "I'm not embarrassed by your appearance, Monique. I wouldn't trade you for anyone else. You want to know something? In the barracks and on missions, I've heard countless men complaining about their wives. Many of them are happier on the battlefield than at home, even with their beautiful wives." He paused, making sure she was listening. "Being in a relationship with someone with a noble heart is priceless, Monique. It's not a regret. It's a blessing." Monique wiped at her eyes, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you, Darius," she said softly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." As they finished their meal, Monique took out a small pill bottle from her purse. She shook out a tablet, her daily thyroid hormone replacement pill to regulate her metabolism, and swallowed it with a gulp of water. They wrapped up their finished meal, dumping the waste in the bin and returning the trays. As they made their way back to their car in the parking lot, both of them felt the weight of what had just transpired. The peaceful homecoming they had envisioned had been disrupted, replaced by a stark reminder of the challenges they faced. Darius started the car's engine, his mind already working on how to address the issues in their neighborhood. But as he was about to exit the parking lot, a familiar roar filled the air. The bikers had returned, one pulling up next to Darius's driver's door, the other blocking their way forward. "Why are you leaving already?" one of them called out, a menacing grin on his face. "It was just about to get fun around here." Darius and Monique exchanged a worried glance. Their afternoon was far from over, and the true test of their resilience was just beginning. Darius's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as he assessed the situation. The bikers had effectively boxed them in, one on each side of the car. He could feel Monique's fear radiating beside him, her breath coming in short, quick gasps. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Darius rolled down his window, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Listen, we don't want any trouble," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Just let us leave." The biker nearest to Darius's window leaned in, the smell of leather and cigarettes wafting into the car. "Your tail between your legs now?" "Walking away won't help you, I told you now," he sneered. "We've called our friends, our eyes are everywhere, and we know where you live." Monique let out a small whimper beside him, and Darius felt a surge of protective anger course through him. He turned to face the biker fully, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and unwavering gaze. "What do you want?" Darius demanded, his voice low and controlled. "Why are you targeting us?" The bikers exchanged amused glances before the one by Darius's window spoke again. "You took our table," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We don't like the look of your wife, and we don't like you acting like a hero. You should receive consequences for your actions." He paused, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "We offered you friendship, but you refused. Now we're offended." Darius's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this situation without escalating it further. "Is it money you want?" he asked, hoping for a simple solution. The bikers laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "While money sounds good," the one blocking their way forward said, "we prefer to have fun with you." As if to emphasize their point, both bikers dismounted from their motorcycles. Monique's voice trembled as she spoke up. "We have no business with you. Please, just leave us alone." One of the bikers circled to the front of their car, whistling as he ran a hand along the hood. "How good this car looks despite its age," he remarked, his tone deceptively casual. Darius felt his patience wearing thin. "I'm warning you," he said, his voice hard. "If you try anything, I'm calling the police." The bikers just laughed again, clearly unimpressed by the threat. They climbed back onto their bikes, the engines roaring to life. "We'll be seeing you around," one of them called out as they drove away, disappearing into the afternoon traffic. As soon as they were out of sight, Darius quickly pulled out of the parking lot, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. Beside him, Monique was visibly shaken. "What are we going to do, Darius?" she asked, her voice quivering. "What if they really do come to our home?" Darius was quiet for a moment, his mind working through their options. Then an idea struck him. "It's been a while since we changed the locks on both the front and back door," he said. "We're going to make a stop at the hardware store." Monique nodded, relief evident in her expression at having a plan of action. As they drove, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of their troubles. The neighborhood issues Monique had mentioned earlier were clearly more serious than he had initially thought. They pulled into the parking lot of a local hardware store, the faded sign reading "Johnson's Hardware" swinging gently in the breeze. Darius turned off the engine and turned to Monique. "Do you want to wait in the car?" he asked gently. Monique shook her head emphatically. "No, I don't want to be alone," she said. "I'm coming with you." Together they entered the store, the bell above the door jingling to announce their arrival. The smell of sawdust and metal filled the air as they made their way down the aisles. Monique's eyes darted around nervously, her mind clearly filled with ways they could protect themselves. "I never expected this would happen to us," she whispered to Darius as they browsed the locks. "For the first time, I feel so insecure about our personal safety." Darius nodded grimly, picking up 2 new brass locks. "We'll get through this together," he assured her, his voice low and comforting. "I won't let anything happen to you." They continued through the store, adding a CCTV system, wires, bells, and ropes to their basket. As they approached the cashier, Darius could feel the weight of the clerk's stare shifting between him and Monique. He met the man's eyes steadily, daring him to comment. The cashier, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, rang up their purchases without a word, but his curious glances spoke volumes. Darius paid quickly, eager to get home and start securing their house. As they left the store, Monique's hand found Darius's, squeezing it tightly. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Darius squeezed back, offering her a small smile. "We're in this together," he reminded her. They got back into the car, the bag of security equipment, a tangible reminder of their new reality. As Darius started the engine, He couldn't help but wonder what other challenges awaited them in Hollowbrook Heights. Whatever came their way, he was determined to face it head-on, protecting Monique and their home at all costs. The drive home was tense, both of them constantly checking for any sign of the bikers. But after 10 minutes, they pulled into their driveway without incident. The familiar sight of their home, a modest 2-story house with faded blue paint, brought a small measure of comfort. Darius grabbed his military bag from the trunk and the hardware store purchases. As they entered the house, the weight of the day's events seemed to settle over them. But there was work to be done. "Let's get these locks changed." Darius set his military bag down in the living room and immediately got to work on installing the new locks. Monique stayed close by, handing him tools as needed and keeping a watchful eye on the windows. As Darius worked, the familiar motions of installing the locks brought back memories of his time in the service. He'd done similar tasks countless times, securing bases and outposts in far-flung corners of the world. But this was different. This was his home, his sanctuary. "These locks are much stronger than our old ones," he explained to Monique as he finished with the front door. "They'll be a lot harder to break through." Monique nodded, a small measure of relief visible on her face. "That's good," she said softly. "But what about the windows?" Darius smiled grimly. "I've got something for those too," he said, reaching for the bag from the hardware store. He pulled out the wires, bells, and rope he had purchased. "I'm going to make some DIY trip alarms. They'll alert us if anyone tries to get in through the windows or doors." Monique's eyes widened with interest. "You know how to make those?" Darius nodded, already starting to work. "Learned it in the military," he explained. "It's a simple but effective system. I'll need to grab some things from my old toolkit in the garage, but it shouldn't take more than half an hour to set up." As Darius worked on the alarms, Monique stayed by his side, watching intently as he explained each step of the process. The familiar routine of working with his hands helped calm Darius's nerves, and he found himself relaxing slightly for the first time since the encounter with the bikers. "There," he said finally, holding up the completed alarm. "This will do the trick. We'll set these up by the doors and windows. If anyone tries to break in, we'll know immediately." Monique nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and relief. "You're amazing, Darius," she said softly. "I feel safer already." Darius gave her a reassuring smile. "We're not done yet," he said, reaching for the CCTV system. "I'll install this tomorrow. Between the new locks, the alarms, and the cameras, we'll be well protected. And remember, we can always call the police if anything happens." As they made their way upstairs to their bedroom, Darius's mind was still working, processing the events of the day. He turned to Monique as they reached the top of the stairs. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've heard about that biker gang before. They've been in the news, terrorizing different areas for months, especially black neighborhoods." He shook his head, a look of determination crossing his face. "I didn't expect them to be here in our neighborhood, not this year." Monique nodded sadly. "Everyone's been worried," she admitted. "More on guard. Did you know Elena Robert and her husband sold their house? One day those bikers threw rocks through her kitchen window while she was cooking. She was too scared to stay after that." Darius's jaw clenched at this news. "They've harmed enough people," he said, his voice low and intense. "If they want to try something with us, let them come. It'll be a good opportunity to finally teach them a lesson." Monique looked at her husband, fear and admiration warring in her eyes. Despite her anxiety, she felt a surge of confidence. Darius was here now, one of the most respected Marines she knew, and he was 10 times stronger than any of these bikers who only had courage in groups. As they entered their bedroom, Monique found herself relaxing slightly. The familiar surroundings combined with Darius's steady presence helped ease some of the tension from the day. Darius began unpacking his bag, his movements efficient and practiced. After a long hot shower that helped wash away some of the stress of the day, they settled in front of the TV, trying to unwind. The normalcy of the moment was almost surreal after the events of the afternoon. Monique found herself stealing glances at Darius, marveling at his calm demeanor. He caught her looking and gave her a reassuring smile, reaching out to take her hand. "We're going to be okay," he said softly. "I promise you that." Monique nodded, squeezing his hand gratefully. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a loud bang from outside shattered the peaceful moment. Darius and Monique exchanged a dreadful glance, their hearts racing. Without a word, they rushed downstairs, Darius in the lead. Through the window, they could see flickering red and yellow light casting eerie shadows on the lawn. They rushed to the door, Darius yanking it open in his haste. In their panic, they forgot about the tripwire alarm Darius had just installed. As they burst outside, the bells rang out, adding to the chaos of the moment. Darius cursed under his breath, quickly manipulating the wire to switch off the alarm. As the ringing subsided, they stepped out onto the porch, and the full extent of the situation became clear. Their car, parked in the driveway, was on fire. The night air was filled with the acrid smell of burning rubber and melting metal. Flames licked at the body of their car, casting an orange glow across the normally quiet street. In the distance, they could hear the roar of motorcycle engines fading away. "That's just the beginning," a voice shouted, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. Darius sprang into action immediately. "Monique, call 911, he shouted as he sprinted towards the garden hose coiled near the side of the house. With practiced efficiency, he unraveled the hose and turned on the water full blast, directing the stream at the burning vehicle. Monique, her hands shaking, pulled out her phone and dialed emergency services. As she spoke to the dispatcher, explaining the situation in a trembling voice, she watched Darius battle the flames. The commotion had drawn the attention of their neighbors. Doors opened up and down the street, and soon a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Some of the closer neighbors, seeing Darius's efforts, rushed to help with their own garden hoses. "What happened? Is everyone okay? Was it those bikers again?" The questions came from all directions as more people arrived on the scene. Monique, having finished her call to 911, approached the group, her eyes never leaving Darius as he continued to fight the fire. "It was them," she confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bikers." A murmur of anger and fear rippled through the crowd. An elderly man, his face lined with worry, spoke up. "These hooligans have been causing trouble for a year now. It's not safe here anymore." Others chimed in, each with their own story of harassment or property damage at the hands of the biker gang. Monique listened, her heart sinking as she realized the extent of the problem. It wasn't just her and Darius who had been targeted. The entire neighborhood was living in fear. "They've asked some of us to pay up," a young mother said, clutching her robe tightly around her. "Said it was for protection, but we all know it's just extortion." "I've had my car vandalized twice now," another neighbor added. "The police say they're investigating, but nothing ever comes of it." As the stories continued, Monique noticed a common thread: the police's apparent inability or unwillingness to address the problem. She glanced back at Darius, who was still focused on extinguishing the last of the flames, and wondered if he was hearing any of this. An elderly black couple made their way through the crowd towards Monique. "We're the Fredericks," the woman introduced herself. "We live just across the street. We've been thinking of moving away if this doesn't stop soon. We don't have any family who can protect us, and we're scared for our lives. These bikers, they seem to target us black folks more than anyone else." Monique's heart went out to the couple. She reached out and took Mrs. Frederick's hand. "I understand," she said softly. "My husband here. He's a Marine and has only been back for less than a day, and already—" She trailed off as Darius approached, his face streaked with soot, his uniform damp from the water spray. The fire was out, leaving behind the smoking shell of their car. "The fire department and police are on their way," Monique informed him. Darius nodded, his eyes scanning the gathered crowd. "I heard some of what you all were saying," he said, his voice carrying easily in the night air. "This situation with the bikers, it's worse than I realized." He turned to the Fredericks. "No one should have to leave their home because of these criminals," he said firmly. "We need to keep pushing for action on this case. Leaving won't solve the problem. I saw in the news last year that this same biker gang was targeting other areas. As long as they're not caught by the authorities, they'll keep spreading terror everywhere. The Fredericks looked at Darius with a mixture of hope and desperation. "You're Monique's husband, aren't you?" Mr. Frederick asked. "The Marine?" Darius nodded. "Please," Mrs. Frederick pleaded, "help us bring this situation to an end. If anyone could move the police to act, it's a Marine." Darius looked at the burnt-out shell of his car, then back at the faces of his neighbors. Scared, hopeful, desperate for someone to take action. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Being a Marine didn't automatically mean the police would listen to him, but looking at Monique, seeing the fear and worry etched on her face, he knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "I promise you all," he said, his voice ringing with determination, "I will do my best to bring these criminals to justice and return safety to Hollowbrook Heights." A cheer went up from the gathered neighbors, a spark of hope igniting in the community. As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Darius knew that his homecoming had turned into something much more significant. He had a new mission now to protect not just his wife, but his entire neighborhood. The challenge ahead was daunting, but as he looked at the grateful faces around him, Darius felt a familiar resolve settling over him. This was what he had trained for, what he had fought for overseas, to protect people, to stand up against injustice. And now that fight had come to his own backyard. As the fire truck and police cars pulled up, lights flashing, Darius turned to Monique. "It's going to be a long night," he said softly, "but we're going to get through this, together." Monique nodded, reaching out to take his hand. As they turned to face the arriving authorities, both of them knew that their lives in Hollowbrook Heights would never be the same again. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The fire department ensured the car fire was completely extinguished, while police officers took statements from Darius, Monique, and the neighbors who had witnessed the incident. As the crowd began to disperse, Darius found himself deep in conversation with one of the officers, explaining the earlier confrontation at McDonald's and the subsequent threats. It was well past midnight by the time the last emergency vehicle pulled away, leaving Darius and Monique standing alone in their driveway, the charred remains of their car, a stark reminder of the night's events. "We should get some rest," Monique said softly, tugging gently on Darius's arm. "It's been a long day." Darius nodded, his eyes still fixed on the burnt-out car. "You go on up," he said. "I need to fix the tripwire alarm I dismantled earlier. Won't take long." Monique hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave him alone. "Are you sure?" "I can stay with you." Darius managed a small smile, turning to face her. "I'm sure. Go get some sleep. I'll be up soon." With a nod and a quick kiss on his cheek, Monique made her way inside and up the stairs. Darius watched her go, waiting until he heard the bedroom door close, before turning his attention back to the task at hand. He worked quickly and efficiently, repairing the tripwire alarm he had hastily disconnected earlier. As he worked, his mind raced, processing the events of the day and formulating plans for the challenges ahead. Once the alarm was back in place, Darius remembered the CCTV system they had purchased earlier. Despite the late hour, he felt a pressing need to have it installed immediately. He retrieved the box from where he had left it in the living room and set to work. The process of installing the cameras and connecting them to his phone took nearly an hour. By the time he finished positioning cameras to cover the porch and driveway, it was approaching midnight. Exhaustion suddenly hit him like a wave as he washed his hands at the kitchen sink. "Some homecoming," he muttered to himself, thinking back to the doctor's orders for rest and avoiding heavy physical activity. Life, it seemed, had other plans. Darius made his way upstairs, his body aching from the day's exertions. As he entered the bedroom, he found Monique already asleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. He changed quietly, not wanting to wake her, and slipped into bed. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mocking faces of the bikers, heard their taunting words. The image of his car engulfed in flames played on repeat in his mind. He tossed and turned, careful not to disturb Monique, but unable to find rest. After what felt like hours, Darius gave up on sleep. He glanced at the clock, 1:30 a.m. With a quiet sigh, he carefully got out of bed and made his way to his office, leaving Monique sleeping peacefully. In his office, Darius switched on his computer. The old machine whirred to life slowly, its outdated processor struggling to keep up with modern demands. But it was functional, and that was all he needed right now. As the computer booted up, Darius settled into his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He knew what he had to do. If he was going to protect his family and his neighborhood, he needed information. And so, in the quiet hours of the early morning, Darius began his research. He scoured news sites and police reports, searching for any information about the biker gang that had been terrorizing Hollowbrook Heights. Article after article detailed incidents of violence and drug trafficking, not just in their area, but in surrounding neighborhoods as well. Darius printed out relevant articles and photos, creating a makeshift evidence board on his desk. As the pile of papers grew, so did his understanding of the situation. The gang, he learned, was known as the Hellmask Riders. Their leader, a man named Axel "Red" Thornton, featured prominently in several reports. A tall, muscular blonde man with a proud and rebellious look that seemed to challenge the very concept of law and order. The bikers from the McDonald's incident were identified in some of the reports as Jake, Crusher Daniels, and Tommy Rat McGuire. Darius made note of their nicknames, knowing such information could be crucial. He delved deeper, learning that Axel had once owned a garage where he modified and customized bikes. This information piqued Darius's interest. Such a place could easily serve as a front for less legal activities. However, try as he might, he couldn't find an address for the garage or the club's headquarters. As Darius worked, the night deepened around him. The soft glow of his computer screen illuminated his determined face as he pieced together the puzzle of the Hellmask Riders. He was so engrossed in his task that he barely noticed the passage of time until he heard the first chirping of birds outside his window. Glancing at the clock on the wall, Darius was startled to see it was already 4 a.m. He had been working for hours without realizing it. With a weary sigh, he began to gather the papers strewn across his desk, organizing them into a document folder. As he switched off his computer and the light in his office, Darius felt a mix of determination and trepidation. The information he had gathered painted a grim picture of the challenges facing Hollowbrook Heights, but it also gave him a starting point, a foundation from which to build a plan of action. Darius made his way back to the bedroom, the folder of documents clutched in his hand. He placed it on his bedside table before climbing into bed. As his head hit the pillow, exhaustion finally overcame him, and he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Little did he know, the few hours of rest he managed to get would be crucial for the challenges that awaited him in the coming day. The battle for Hollowbrook Heights was just beginning, and Darius Carter was now at the center of it all. The shrill sound of the alarm clock pierced through Darius's consciousness, dragging him from the depths of sleep. His eyes snapped open, immediately alert despite the mere 2.5 hours of rest he'd managed to get. The bedside clock read 6 a.m. Beside him, Monique stirred, her face creasing with the effort of waking. Darius reached out, gently touching her arm. "Go back to sleep," he murmured softly. "It's still early." Monique mumbled something incoherent before settling back into the pillows. Darius watched her for a moment, a mix of love and protectiveness washing over him. Then, with a quiet sigh, he rose from the bed and headed to the bathroom. The hot water of the shower helped to invigorate him, washing away some of the fatigue from the previous day and night. As he dressed, donning a fresh set of clothes rather than his uniform, Darius's mind was already racing, formulating plans for the day ahead. He grabbed his bag and the document folder from his bedside table, then made his way out of the bedroom. In the hallway, he paused, pulling out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before he found the contact he was looking for. Malik Jones. Malik had been Darius's best friend in the Marines, a brother-in-arms who had stood beside him through countless missions and hardships. If there was anyone Darius could trust to have his back in this situation, it was Malik. The phone rang several times before Malik's sleep-roughened voice came through. "Darius?" Man, do you know what time it is? Sorry for the early call, Malik, Darius said, his voice low to avoid disturbing Monique. I know you're probably wondering why I'm calling when I'm supposed to be resting at home and off duty. There was a rustling sound on the other end of the line, and when Malik spoke again, he sounded more alert. What's going on, brother? Everything okay? Darius took a deep breath, then launched into an explanation of everything that had happened since his return home. The confrontation at McDonald's, the threats, the car fire. As he spoke, he could hear Malik's breathing quicken, a sure sign that his friend was becoming as concerned as he was. This isn't just affecting me and Monique, Darius concluded. It's the whole community. I hate to ask, but I could use your help, Malik. Can you come by? Malik's response was immediate and resolute. Say no more, brother. I'm on my way. Give me an hour. Relief washed over Darius. Thanks, Malik. I owe you one. Nah, you don't owe me anything, Malik replied, the sound of movement evident in the background. That's what brothers are for. See you soon. As Darius ended the call, he heard the bedroom door open behind him. Monique stepped out, wrapped in her robe, her eyes still heavy with sleep. Good morning, she said softly, stifling a yawn. Who were you talking to? Malik, Darius replied, turning to face her. I called to ask for his help with our situation. He's coming over in about an hour. Monique nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. That's good. Malik's a good man. It'll be nice to see him again. Her smile faltered slightly as she took in Darius's appearance. Where are you going so early? Darius hesitated for a moment, then decided on honesty. I'm going to the police station, he said. I want to file a formal report about the biker gang. I've been researching them all night, Monique. This goes deeper than we thought. Concern flashed across Monique's face. All night? Darius, you need rest, and what about your car? It's not exactly drivable right now. I'll take the bus, Darius replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Don't worry about me, Monique. I've operated on less sleep than this before. Monique looked like she wanted to protest further, but instead she just nodded. At least let me make you some coffee before you go, she offered. Darius glanced at his watch, noting the time. No need, he said, leaning in to place a quick kiss on her forehead. The bus will be here in 7 minutes. I need to hurry. He made his way downstairs, Monique following close behind. As he put on his shoes, Darius turned to his wife one last time. Remember, Malik will be here in an hour. You don't need to worry, okay? Monique nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Be careful, Darius, she said softly. With a final reassuring smile, Darius stepped out into the early morning air. The neighborhood was quiet, the first rays of sunlight just beginning to peek over the horizon. He walked briskly to the bus stop, his mind already focused on the task ahead. As he boarded the bus, paying his fare and finding a seat, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this day would be pivotal in their fight against the Hellmask Riders. The bus rumbled through the awakening streets of Hollowbrook Heights, the early morning light casting long shadows across the familiar landscape. Darius sat rigidly in his seat, his mind churning with the information he had gathered during his late-night research session. The folder of documents rested heavily in his lap, a tangible reminder of the task that lay ahead. As the bus made its way towards the commercial area of town, Darius found himself seated next to a businesswoman, her crisp suit and focused expression a stark contrast to his own casual attire and troubled demeanor. He barely noticed her, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, a habit born from years of military service. The police station was still 2 stops away when something caught Darius's attention. As the bus slowed for a stop in the heart of the still quiet commercial district, he spotted 2 familiar figures standing outside a local bakery. His body tensed as he recognized the insignia on their vests. It was the Hellmask Riders, but not Crusher and Rat from the day before. These were different members. Darius's mind raced. He knew this bakery, Henderson's Baked Goods. Its owner, Samuel Henderson, was a fixture in the community, an elderly black man who had been a part of the neighborhood for decades. The bakery itself had stood for 40 years, a beloved staple in Hollowbrook Heights. As new passengers boarded the bus, Darius craned his neck to get a better view. The two bikers outside were clearly on lookout duty, their eyes scanning the area with predatory intensity. Through the bakery's large front window, Darius could see two more bikers inside, engaged in what appeared to be a heated conversation with an elderly man, undoubtedly Samuel Henderson himself. The scene before him set off alarm bells in Darius's head. The aggressive posturing of the bikers, the evident distress on Mr. Henderson's face. It was clear that this was no friendly visit. Without a second thought, Darius stood up, his sudden movement startling the businesswoman beside him. "Excuse me," he muttered, already moving towards the bus's exit. "I'm sorry." "Sir, we're not at a stop," the bus driver called out, confusion evident in his voice. "I need to get off now," Darius insisted, his tone brooking no argument. The driver hesitated for a moment, but then declared, "Wait for the next stop, man. No special treatment here." Darius felt the passenger's eyes boring into him. Keeping his head down, he quietly made his way toward the door, murmuring apologies as he passed. He could only hope the bus would reach the next stop soon so he could get off. The bus pulled to the next stop 5 minutes later. The doors opened, and Darius stepped off, followed by streams of passengers. As the doors closed behind him and the bus pulled away, he realized he was several blocks from the bakery, but standing in front of the police station, which had been his original destination. With no time to waste and without his car, Darius quickly made up his mind. He would visit the bakery first, check on Mr. Henderson, and then head to the station. But with precious seconds slipping away, there was only one option left. He started running. Darius's feet pounded the pavement as he sprinted down the sidewalk, dodging early morning commuters and startling a group of joggers. His military training kicked in, his breathing steady despite the exertion. In his mind, he could see Mr. Henderson, alone and vulnerable in the face of the Hellmask Rider's intimidation. As he rounded the final corner, the bakery came into view. Darius slowed his pace, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath, but his heart sank as he realized he was too late. The bikers' motorcycles were gone, leaving no trace of their presence except for the lingering smell of exhaust in the air. Determined to assess the situation, Darius approached the bakery. The open sign hung in the window, but as he pushed open the door, the cheerful jingle of the bell seemed out of place in the tense atmosphere. The familiar aroma of fresh pastries filled the air, but the usual warmth of the bakery seemed subdued by an underlying current of unease. "Mr. Henderson," Darius called out, his voice echoing in the quiet shop. "It's Darius Carter. Are you here?" For a moment there was no response. Then from behind the counter, the elderly baker emerged, his face etched with worry lines that hadn't been there the last time Darius had seen him. "Darius?" Mr. Henderson's voice was tinged with surprise and a hint of relief. "What brings you here so early? I thought you were still on duty." Darius approached the counter, his posture relaxed but alert. "I just got back yesterday, Mr. Henderson. I saw some bikers outside your shop a few minutes ago. Is everything all right? What happened?" he asked. Though he already had a sinking feeling, he knew the answer. Mr. Henderson's face paled slightly at the mention of the bikers, but he quickly composed himself. "Oh, that? It's nothing to worry about, son. Just some rowdy customers." Darius frowned, unconvinced by the old man's attempt at nonchalance. "Mr. Henderson, I know about the Hellmask Riders. They've been causing trouble in the neighborhood. If they're threatening you, we need to report this to the police." As Darius reached for his phone, Mr. Henderson's hand shot out, grasping his wrist with surprising strength. No police," he said urgently. "Please, Darius, I can't afford to close the shop today. If word gets out, they might come back." Darius hesitated, torn between his instinct to involve the authorities and his respect for the old baker's wishes. "Mr. Henderson, these men are dangerous. They need to be stopped." The old man sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "They've been coming for months," he admitted quietly. demanding money. I've been trying to handle it on my own. I thought I could protect my business, my legacy. Darius's jaw clenched as he listened to Mr. Henderson's story. It aligned all too well with what he had heard from his neighbors the night before. So it's real. This wasn't just about him and Monique anymore. This was about his entire community. Good people like Mr. Henderson, who were being terrorized in their own homes and businesses. "Why didn't you tell anyone in the neighborhood?" he asked gently. "They could have helped." Mr. Henderson's eyes filled with shame. "I was embarrassed," he confessed, "and scared. They threatened to hurt my family if I told anyone. I thought I could handle it on my own, but—" He trailed off, gesturing helplessly at his empty shop. His voice dropped further, barely above a whisper. "It's lucky this place is mine. If I were renting, I wouldn't be able to pay rent anymore, let alone keep the ovens going. But even still, if they keep pushing for money, I won't be able to bake or pay for the utilities." Darius's jaw tightened, the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "You can't let them get away with this, Mr. Henderson. It's not just about you anymore. These men are terrorizing the entire neighborhood." The old baker looked up at Darius, a glimmer of hope in his tired eyes. "What can we do, the police? They've never been much help." The old baker's eyes fell on the folder of documents clutched in Darius's other hand, the tired lines of his face deepening. "What's that?" he asked, curiosity momentarily overriding his melancholy. Darius glanced down at the folder. "Information," he replied simply, "about the Hellmask Riders. I was on my way to the police station to file a report when I saw what was happening here." Mr. Henderson's face fell at the mention of the police. "The police," he scoffed weakly. "They're not going to do anything. They never do." Darius paused, his finger hovering over the call button on his phone. "What do you mean?" The old man sighed, wincing as the movement aggravated his injuries. "They've been targeting my bakery for months now," he explained, "extorting money from me. I've reported it to the police multiple times, but nothing ever comes of it. They always just take statements, but no one seems to investigate or take concrete steps against them." Darius thought for a moment, his mind racing through potential solutions. "I have a friend, another Marine. Together, we might be able to come up with a plan to deal with these bikers." Darius placed a reassuring hand on the old man's shoulder. "We're going to figure this out, Mr. Henderson. But for now, I think it's best if you close up shop for the day. It's not safe for you to stay here alone." The baker hesitated, his eyes roaming over the displays of unsold pastries and bread. "But my business—" "Your safety is more important," Darius insisted gently. "Go home, stay with family if you can. I'll be in touch soon with a plan." As Mr. Henderson began the process of closing the bakery, Darius's mind was already working on their next steps. He knew he needed to go to the police station to make an official report, even if he wasn't sure how much good it would do. But first he had to ensure Mr. Henderson was safe. "I'll walk you home," Darius offered as the old baker locked up the shop. Mr. Henderson nodded gratefully, and together they stepped out into the late afternoon sun. As they walked, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. The Hellmask Riders had brought fear and violence to Hollowbrook Heights, but now, with Darius back home, things were about to change. The streets seemed different somehow as they made their way to Mr. Henderson's house. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, their faces etched with worry. The once vibrant community felt subdued, as if holding its collective breath. When they reached Mr. Henderson's modest home, Darius made sure the old man was safely inside before bidding him farewell. "Remember, lock all your doors and windows," he reminded him. "I'll be in touch soon." As Darius turned to leave, Mr. Henderson called out to him. "Darius," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "thank you for everything." Darius nodded solemnly. "We're going to make this right, Mr. Henderson. I promise you that." With a final wave, Darius set off towards the police station, his stride purposeful and determined. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across Hollowbrook Heights. As he walked, Darius couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had fought for his country overseas, and now it was time to fight for his home. The police station loomed before Darius, its brick facade bathed in the bright glow of the morning sun. As he approached the entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been growing since his conversation with Mr. Henderson. The familiar weight of his military ID in his pocket provided little comfort as he pushed open the heavy glass doors. Inside, the station buzzed with activity. Officers moved back and forth, their voices a low murmur, punctuated by the occasional ring of a telephone. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Darius made his way to the front desk, where a young officer looked up at him expectantly. "Can I help you, sir?" the officer asked, his voice tinged with the weariness of a long shift. Darius straightened his posture, years of military bearing kicking in automatically. "Yes, I need to file a report about the Hellmask Riders," he said, his voice steady and determined. The officer's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of the notorious gang. "All right, sir. If you'll just take a seat, someone will be with you shortly to take your statement." Darius nodded and moved to the waiting area, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings out of habit. As he sat, he couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from nearby officers. "Another Hellmask incident? Third one this week. Chief's gonna have our heads if we don't make some progress soon." The whispered words only served to heighten Darius's concern. If the situation was this bad, why hadn't more been done? He was pulled from his thoughts by the approach of a middle-aged detective, his rumpled suit and tired eyes speaking of long hours and too many cases. "Mr. Carter," the detective asked, extending his hand. "I'm Detective Johnson. I understand you have information about the Hellmask Riders." Darius stood, shaking the detective's hand firmly. "That's correct, sir. I've just returned from active duty, and I've learned that these men have been terrorizing my neighborhood." Detective Johnson nodded, gesturing for Darius to follow him to a small interview room. As they settled into the uncomfortable plastic chairs, the detective pulled out a notepad and pen. "All right, Mr. Carter, why don't you start from the beginning?" For the next hour, Darius recounted everything he knew about the Hellmask Riders' activities in Hollowbrook Heights. He told the detective about the confrontation at McDonald's, the threats made against him and Monique, and the information he had gathered from Mr. Henderson and other neighbors. As he spoke, Darius couldn't help but notice the detective's lack of surprise at the details he was sharing. It was as if he had heard it all before, many times over. When Darius finished, Detective Johnson leaned back in his chair, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. "Mr. Carter, I appreciate you coming in with this information, but I have to be honest with you. We're aware of the Hellmask Riders' activities. We've been trying to build a case against them for months." Darius felt a surge of frustration. Then why hasn't more been done? These men are terrorizing innocent people, extorting businesses. Surely there's enough evidence to make arrests. The detective's face tightened. It's not that simple. The Hellmask Riders are careful. They know how to cover their tracks, and witnesses are often too scared to testify. We're doing everything we can, but our hands are tied without concrete evidence. Darius leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "What about Mr. Henderson? He's willing to speak out. Surely his testimony, combined with others in the neighborhood, would be enough." Detective Johnson shook his head. "One or two testimonies won't be enough to bring down an entire organization. We need hard evidence, financial records caught in the act of a major crime, something that will stick in court." As the detective's words sank in, Darius felt a mix of anger and determination rising within him. It was clear that if anything was going to change in Hollowbrook Heights, it would be up to the community to make it happen. "So what do you suggest we do?" Darius asked, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. "Just sit back and let these criminals run our neighborhood?" Detective Johnson's expression softened slightly. "Look, Mr. Carter, I understand your frustration, I really do, but please, don't try to take matters into your own hands. It's too dangerous. The best thing you can do is encourage your neighbors to report any incidents, no matter how small. The more reports we have, the stronger our case becomes." Darius nodded, but inside he knew that waiting and reporting wasn't going to be enough. As he stood to leave, the detective handed him a card. "If you hear or see anything else, give me a call," he said. "And Mr. Carter, be careful. The Hellmask Riders aren't known for their forgiveness." As Darius exited the police station, the sun was starting its descent from its zenith, casting Hollowbrook Heights in the soft glow of the horizon. The bus arrived just as he reached the stop in front of the station. He boarded, paid the fare, and found a seat. The drive home felt quicker than it had that morning. His mind raced with strategies, each thought a potential plan of action. He had gone to the police seeking justice, expecting something concrete to be done. Instead, he found only bureaucracy and hesitation. It was clear now. If Hollowbrook Heights was going to be saved from the Hellmask Riders, it would take more than just official channels. As he approached his house, Darius saw Monique waiting for him on the porch, worry etched on her face. He knew that the conversation ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he couldn't face this threat alone. Together, they would find a way to bring peace back to their community, with or without the help of the authorities. The day ahead promised to be long, filled with planning and difficult decisions. But as Darius climbed the steps to his porch, he felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced since his days in active service. The Hellmask Riders had brought war to Hollowbrook Heights, and Darius was ready to fight back. The soft glow of the afternoon light cast gentle shadows across Monique's face as Darius approached. Her eyes, a mix of concern and relief, searched his expression, looking for any clue about what had happened at the police station. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace of the evening. Darius sighed heavily, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "Not great," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "They're aware of the situation, but they say their hands are tied without more concrete evidence." Monique's shoulders slumped slightly, the hope that had been building throughout the day deflating visibly. "So, what do we do now?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Darius reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The familiar warmth of her skin against his was grounding, a reminder of what he was fighting for. "Now," he said, his voice low but filled with determination, "we take matters into our own hands. Malik should be here soon again. We need to come up with a plan." As if on cue, the rumble of an approaching car broke the silence. Darius and Monique turned to see Malik's sedan pulling into their driveway. Malik emerged from the car, his imposing figure a comforting sight to Darius. Despite the years that had passed since their time in active service together, Malik still moved with the fluid grace of a trained Marine, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. "Darius, Monique," Malik greeted them, his deep voice carrying easily in the quiet night air. "Sorry I'm a little late. Traffic was a nightmare." Darius stepped forward, clasping his old friend's hand in a firm shake that quickly turned into a brief, tight hug. "Thanks for coming, brother," he said, genuine gratitude in his voice. Monique offered Malik a warm smile. "It's good to see you, Malik. Come on inside, both of you. I've got coffee brewing." As they entered the house, the familiar scent of home wrapped around Darius like a comforting blanket. But even here, in the sanctuary of his own living room, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been growing since his encounter with the Hellmask Riders. They settled in the living room, Monique distributing mugs of steaming coffee before taking a seat next to Darius on the couch. Malik lowered himself into an armchair, his expression serious as he looked between the couple. "All right," he said, his voice low and focused. "Fill me in. What exactly are we dealing with here?" For the next hour, Darius and Monique took turns explaining the situation to Malik. They told him about the confrontation at McDonald's, the threats made against them, and the widespread fear that had taken hold of Hollowbrook Heights. Darius shared what he had learned from Mr. Henderson and his frustrating visit to the police station. As they spoke, Malik's expression grew increasingly grim. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the armrest. "This is serious," he said finally, his voice heavy with concern. "These Hellmask riders, they're not just some small-time gang. From what you're telling me, they've got their hooks deep into this community." Darius nodded, his jaw clenched tight. "That's why we need your help, Malik. The police aren't doing enough, and I can't just sit back and watch our neighborhood be terrorized." Malik's eyes met Darius's, a silent understanding passing between them. They had faced danger together before, in far-flung corners of the world. But this was different. This was home. "You know I've got your back, brother," Malik said, his voice firm with resolve. "But we need to be smart about this. We can't just go in guns blazing. We need a plan." Monique, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "What about gathering evidence?" she suggested. "If we could get proof of their illegal activities, something the police can't ignore." Darius and Malik exchanged a look, both recognizing the merit in Monique's idea. "That could work," Darius said slowly, his mind already racing with possibilities. "But it would be dangerous. We'd need to get close to their operation without being detected." Malik nodded, a hint of his old pre-mission excitement creeping into his voice. "We've done more with less, remember?" Back in Kandahar. A ghost of a smile crossed Darius's face at the memory. "True, but this isn't a sanctioned mission. We'd be on our own, no backup." "All the more reason to plan carefully," Malik agreed. "We'll need to do some reconnaissance first, figure out their patterns, their hangouts." As the two men began to discuss potential strategies, Monique watched with a mixture of pride and fear. She knew the risks they were considering, the danger they would be putting themselves in, but she also knew that if anyone could bring down the Hellmask riders and restore peace to Hollowbrook Heights, it was these two men. The afternoon wore on, coffee grew cold, and plans began to take shape. By the time the late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, a course of action was decided. It was risky and demanded every bit of their skill and experience, but it was their best chance to protect their community. As Malik prepared to leave, promising to return later that day to begin their operation, Darius walked him to the door. The two men paused on the porch, the quiet of the early morning broken only by the distant chirping of birds. "Are you sure about this, Darius?" Malik asked, his voice low. "Once we start down this road—" Darius nodded, his expression resolute. "I'm sure. This is our home, Malik. We fought for our country overseas. Now it's time to fight for our own backyard." "Okay, then we'll start with Henderson. He's one of the oldest members of the community and knows the routines of this town well. I think talking to him again this time will give us more insight," Malik suggested. Monique turned to Darius, determination in her eyes. "I want to come with you to Mr. Henderson's," she said. Darius exhaled, shaking his head. "I get it, Monique, but Mr. Henderson is already on the bikers' radar, and it wouldn't be safe for you to come along. It's better if you stay here, or even safer, at Mr. and Mrs. Frederick's house across the street. Even with the CCTV installed at home, those guys are still dangerous." His voice was firm yet gentle, making it clear this wasn't just a suggestion. It was a necessary precaution. Monique hesitated. She wanted to help, but she also knew Darius was right. With a small nod, she conceded, "All right, I'll go to Mr. and Mrs. Frederick's and see how I can help them today." Darius gave her a grateful look before heading toward the door. Malik was already grabbing his keys, ready to go. The two men stepped outside, the cooling air doing little to ease the weight of what lay ahead. As they climbed into Malik's car, Monique crossed the street toward the Fredericks' home. Malik rolled down the window just as the elderly couple appeared on their porch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "Evening, Mr. and Mrs. Frederick," Malik greeted with a nod. From the passenger seat, Darius leaned slightly toward the open window. "We need a favor," he said. "Stay together, keep the doors locked, we'll handle this." His voice carried the steady assurance of someone used to taking command. Mr. Frederick gave a slow nod, his hand resting protectively on his wife's shoulder. "You boys be careful," he warned. "We will," Darius promised. Mrs. Frederick ushered Monique inside, giving her a warm but worried glance. As the door closed behind her, Malik put the car in gear. "Let's go," Darius said. The engine rumbled to life and they pulled away, heading toward Mr. Henderson's, toward answers, and toward whatever danger waited for them in the shadows of Hollowbrook Heights. The dusk's first hues brushed the sky, casting long shadows across Hollowbrook Heights as Darius and Malik set out from Darius's home. The clock on the dashboard read 5:20 p.m. as they pulled away from the curb, leaving Monique behind at the Fredericks house across the street. "You sure Monique will be okay?" Malik asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at the diminishing figures of Monique and the elderly couple on their porch. Darius nodded, his jaw set with determination. "She's safer there than coming with us. Besides, we need to get more information from Mr. Henderson about these Hellmask riders." As they drove through the familiar streets, now eerily quiet in the wake of recent events, Darius couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. The neighborhood he'd known and loved for years felt different somehow, as if a shadow had fallen over it. They turned onto Mr. Henderson's street, the old baker's modest home coming into view. But something was wrong. 4 motorcycles were parked haphazardly in front of the house, their chrome gleaming menacingly in the late afternoon light. "Darius," Malik said, his voice tense, "those bikes—" "I see them," Darius replied, his military training kicking in as he assessed the situation. "Park here, out of sight. We need to approach carefully." They left the car a block away, moving swiftly but silently towards Mr. Henderson's house. As they drew closer, the sound of raised voices and a muffled cry of pain reached their ears. Darius's heart raced as they crept up to a window, peering inside. The scene that greeted them made his blood run cold. Mr. Henderson was on the floor, his face bruised and bloodied, surrounded by 4 men wearing the now familiar Hellmask insignia. "Where's the rest of it, old man?" one of the bikers growled, kicking Mr. Henderson in the ribs. "We know you've got more stashed away." Mr. Henderson coughed, a thin trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Please," he wheezed, "that's all I have. The bakery, it's not doing well." Another biker, whom Darius recognized as Crusher from their previous encounter, laughed cruelly. "Well, ain't that a shame? Maybe we should pay a visit to that pretty granddaughter of yours, see if she can't help out her poor grandpa." Darius felt a surge of rage course through him. He turned to Malik, his eyes blazing with determination. "We can't wait any longer. We need to act now." Malik nodded, his own expression hardening. "What's the play?" "Front and back," Darius said, his mind racing through tactical options. "I'll take the front, create a distraction. You come in through the back, flank them." With a silent nod of agreement, they split up. Darius moved towards the front door, his heart pounding in his ears. He took a deep breath, centering himself, then kicked the door open with all his might. The wood splintered with a resounding crack and Darius burst into the room. "Marine!" he shouted, hoping to sow confusion among the bikers. "Hands where I can see them!" The Hellmask riders spun around, momentarily caught off guard by the sudden intrusion. Darius and Malik stood tense, their bodies poised for action as they faced the 4 bikers who had just stormed through the door. This time, Crasher and Rat were nowhere in sight. The riders' eyes glinted with malice beneath their notorious masks, their leather vests creaking as they spread out, closing in on the 2 Marines. A biker Darius had not recognized sneered as he cracked his knuckles. "Well, well, looks like we've got ourselves a couple of heroes. You boys should have minded your own business." Darius's jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving the bikers as he spoke in a low, controlled voice. "This is our business. Hollowbrook Heights is our home, and we won't let you terrorize it any longer." A tense silence filled the room for a moment, broken only by Mr. Henderson's ragged breathing as he huddled in the corner, his face a mask of fear and disbelief. Then, with a roar of rage, the biker lunged forward, swinging a meaty fist at Darius's head. The Marine's training kicked in instantly. Darius ducked under the punch, using the biker's momentum against him to send the larger man stumbling past. In the same fluid motion, he drove an elbow into the solar plexus of another biker who had tried to grab him from behind. Beside him, Malik was a whirlwind of controlled violence. His powerful frame moved with surprising grace as he grappled with two bikers at once, his face set in grim determination. The living room erupted into chaos. Furniture crashed to the floor as bodies slammed into walls and grappled for dominance. Mr. Henderson's carefully arranged knickknacks shattered, years of memories reduced to broken shards on the carpet. Darius found himself locked in a brutal struggle with the biker. His size and raw strength were formidable, but Darius's military training gave him an edge in technique and discipline. They traded blows, each impact resonating through the room like thunderclaps. "You're making a big mistake," he growled, spittle flying from his lips as he tried to pin Darius against the wall. "The Hellmask Riders don't forget, and we don't forgive." Darius met the biker's gaze steadily, his voice low and dangerous. "Neither do I," he replied, before driving his knee up into his midsection. The biker doubled over, gasping for air, and Darius seized the opportunity. With a series of swift, precise strikes, he brought the biker to his knees, finally subduing the larger man with a chokehold. Across the room, Malik had managed to overpower one of his attackers, but the other had pulled a knife. The blade glinted dangerously in the fading afternoon light as the biker slashed wildly at Malik. "Darius," Malik called out, his voice strained as he dodged another swipe of the knife. "A little help here." Without hesitation, Darius released his opponent, who slumped to the floor and rushed to his friend's aid. He tackled the knife-wielding biker from behind, the impact sending all three of them crashing into Mr. Henderson's coffee table. The wood splintered beneath their combined weight, adding to the cacophony of destruction. In the ensuing struggle, Darius managed to disarm the biker, sending the knife skittering across the floor. With Malik's help, they quickly subdued the remaining Hellmask Riders, using zip ties from Darius's pocket to secure their wrists. As the dust settled, Darius and Malik surveyed the scene, both men breathing heavily from the exertion. Mr. Henderson's living room was a disaster zone of overturned furniture, broken glass, and groaning bikers. "You okay?" Darius asked Malik, noticing a cut above his friend's eye that was starting to swell. Malik nodded, wiping blood from his lip. "Nothing I can't handle. You—" Darius did a quick self-assessment. His knuckles were raw and bleeding, and he could feel the beginnings of several bruises, but nothing seemed seriously injured. "I'm good. Check on Mr. Henderson." As Malik helped the shaken baker to his feet, Darius began securing the subdued bikers more thoroughly. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, no doubt alerted by concerned neighbors. The biker, still wheezing from the chokehold, glared at Darius with undisguised hatred. "This ain't over," he spat. "You have no idea what you've started." Darius met the biker's gaze unflinchingly. "No," he replied, his voice firm with resolve. "This is where it ends. Hollowbrook Heights isn't your playground anymore." As police cars pulled up outside, their flashing lights illuminating the darkening street, Darius turned his attention to Mr. Henderson. The old man was sitting in his armchair, looking shell-shocked as Malik tended to his injuries. "Mr. Henderson," Darius said gently, kneeling beside him, "I'm so sorry about your home. Are you all right?" Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, wincing as he touched his split lip. I think so. They took all my money. The bakery's earnings, my savings, everything." Darius felt a fresh wave of anger wash over him. "We'll get it back," he promised, "and we'll make sure they can't hurt anyone else in this neighborhood ever again." As police officers entered the house, Darius knew that this was just the beginning. They had won this battle, but the war against the Hellmask Riders was far from over. The evening air hung heavy with the lingering tension of the confrontation. Faint traces of orange and purple streaked the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement in front of Mr. Henderson's house. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers bathed the neighborhood in an eerie glow as the officers finished loading the 4 arrested bikers into the back of their vehicles. Darius stood with Malik just outside the gate, watching as the officers took statements from Mr. Henderson and a few shaken neighbors who had gathered to witness the commotion. The officers assured them they would take a closer look at the case now that they had solid evidence, fingerprints, CCTV footage, and other leads that could finally tie the gang to their crimes. But when Darius pressed them, his voice edged with urgency, asking them to prioritize the case and dig deeper. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a weary-looking sergeant with graying temples, sighed and shook his head. "Look, I get where you're coming from," the sergeant said, "but we're stretched thin as it is. We'll process this case, but launching a full-scale investigation into a bigger operation, that's a lot. We don't have the manpower for something like that right now." Darius's jaw tightened. "So what? You'll just handle these four and ignore the rest of the gang? That's not how this works. You've got a real chance to take them down, and you're telling me you don't have the resources?" The sergeant didn't meet his gaze. "We'll do what we can." Darius exchanged a glance with Malik, who was already shaking his head, his lips pressed into a tight line. They both knew what that meant. The police weren't going to do much beyond the bare minimum, and the real threat, the leader of the Hellmask Riders, was still out there, still in control, still pulling the strings. As the officers wrapped up and finally drove off, the street felt eerily quiet in their absence. The tension hadn't faded. It had merely shifted, morphing into something more calculated, more determined. Malik crossed his arms. "This has gone too far," he muttered. "There will be consequences. You know that, right?" Darius nodded, his gaze fixed on the darkened horizon. "Yeah, and I don't care what it costs. We need to find their leader. Otherwise, we're just trimming the leaves while the roots keep spreading." Malik exhaled sharply. "So what's the move?" Darius thought for a moment, then looked at him with a sharp glint in his eye. "We go public. If the police won't act, we make sure they don't have a choice. We take this to the news. Get as many eyes on this as possible. The more attention we bring, the harder it'll be for them to ignore." Malik's brows lifted slightly before he let out a low chuckle. "You really want to make a mess out of this, huh?" Darius smirked. "I want to finish it. It's our best shot at forcing the police to take action." Malik clapped him on the shoulder. "Then let's get to work." As they turned away from the quiet house, heading back toward Malik's car, the evening air felt heavier than before. Not with uncertainty, but with purpose. This wasn't over, not even close. The hum of the engine filled the silence as Malik's car sped down the dimly lit road, the neighborhood lights flickering in the distance as they merged to the highway. The weight of their mission pressed against them. Every hour counted if they were going to bring the Hellmask Riders into the public eye. Malik glanced at the fuel gauge and frowned. "We'll need to make a quick stop first. Running on fumes here." Darius exhaled sharply. "Think we'll make it?" "The entire journey, not a chance. We'll have to stop." As they approached a gas station near the highway, Malik flicked the turn signal and pulled into a gas station just off the highway. The neon glow of the station's sign buzzed in the otherwise quiet night. As soon as they rolled to a stop by the pump, Malik unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'll go pay. You good here?" Darius nodded. "Yeah, go ahead." His eyes already scanning their surroundings. Malik stepped out, heading toward the brightly lit convenience store while Darius leaned back in his seat, staring absently out the window. He was mentally running through their plan. What to say to the news station, how to frame their case, when movement in the distance caught his attention. His muscles tensed. Across the lot, just beyond the flickering glow of a street lamp, 4 motorcycles rumbled into view. Another 4 bikers in the same vest and insignia, but different to the ones the police had taken away just hours ago. Among the 2 were Crusher and Rat. He recognized them as soon as they took off their helmet. The bikers didn't seem to notice him, likely due to the darkening sky and his position inside the car. Darius watched as they dismounted, gathering around what appeared to be another group of bikers. The newcomers handed over several black sports bags, the exchange quick and furtive. Without taking his eyes off the scene, Darius reached for his phone, his fingers moving with quiet precision as he dialed Malik's number. The call connected after 1 ring. "Malik," he said in a low voice when his friend answered, "the bikers are here, in the parking lot across the street. Looks like they're doing some kind of deal." "Don't come out," Darius murmured, keeping his eyes locked on the bikers. A pause, then Malik's tone sharpened. What? Another 4 bikers just parked up ahead. They haven't seen me. I see them, Malik replied, his voice equally hushed. I can hear bits of their conversation from here. Definitely sounds shady. Darius's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of evidence they needed. We need to follow them, he said. This could be our chance to catch them red-handed. Agreed, Malik said. I'll be out in a minute. Don't let them see you. Darius ended the call, his heart hammering, as he observed the bikers wrapping up their exchange, handing over 2 large sports bags to another group, sporting a different insignia. The low murmur of conversation was soon drowned out by the growl of engines roaring to life, the sound cutting through the quiet night. As the bikers rode off, Malik stepped out of the store, moving swiftly, yet maintaining a casual demeanor to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. "Ready?" Malik asked as he slid into the driver's seat. Darius nodded grimly. "Let's do this." As they pulled out of the gas station following the bikers at a safe distance, Darius dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice came through, crisp and professional. 911, what's your emergency? This is Marine Corps Darius Carter, he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. I'm following a group of bikers involved in criminal activity. We've witnessed what appears to be a drug deal and are currently tailing them on the highway. As Malik navigated through traffic, keeping the bikers in sight without getting too close, Darius relayed their position to the dispatcher. The sun had fully set now, the highway illuminated by the steady glow of streetlights and the red taillights of the vehicles ahead. Darius glanced at the dashboard clock. 7 p.m. It felt like days had passed since that morning when he'd set out to file a simple police report. Now here he was in the middle of what felt like a high-stakes operation. "Stay on the line, Mr. Carter," the dispatcher instructed. "Units are being dispatched to your location. Do not engage with the suspects. Your safety is our primary concern." "We'll try," Darius replied, his eyes never leaving the group of bikers ahead. As they continued down the highway, following the twists and turns of the road, Darius couldn't help but reflect on how quickly his homecoming had turned into this dangerous pursuit. But beneath the tension and uncertainty, a part of him felt alive in a way he hadn't since leaving active duty. This was what he was trained for, to protect and serve. The bikers took an exit, leading them away from the main highway and towards an area of abandoned warehouses. Darius relayed this information to the dispatcher, his voice low and urgent. "They're stopping," Malik whispered, slowing the car and pulling off to the side of the road, hidden from view by a cluster of overgrown bushes. Darius peered through the windshield, his trained eyes taking in every detail of the scene before them. The bikers had parked outside a dilapidated warehouse, its windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. But unlike the truly abandoned buildings surrounding it, this one showed signs of recent activity. "We've got eyes on the suspects," Darius informed the dispatcher. "They've stopped at an abandoned warehouse. There are dozens of bikers here. This looks like their base of operations." As they watched, the warehouse door opened, spilling light onto the cracked pavement outside. A figure emerged, tall and imposing even from a distance. Darius's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the man from the photographs he'd studied the night before. "That must be Axel Red Thornton," he whispered to Malik, "the leader of the Hell Mask Riders." The pieces were falling into place, but Darius knew they weren't out of danger yet. As they sat in tense silence, waiting for the police to arrive, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from over. The real battle for Hollowbrook Heights was just beginning. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness as Darius and Malik observed the warehouse from their hidden vantage point. The 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, assuring them that police units were en route. "We need to get a closer look," Darius murmured, his eyes never leaving the warehouse entrance. "If we can get visual confirmation of illegal activity, it'll be harder for the police to ignore." Malik nodded and reached into the glove compartment, retrieving a handgun and a pair of binoculars. "Just in case," he muttered, passing the binoculars to Darius. "After what happened to my family, you remember. Old habits die hard." Darius nodded and took the binoculars, leaving the gun with Malik. His own weapon was back at home, a decision he was now regretting. "Let's move," he said, his voice low and determined. They exited the car silently, years of military training evident in their cautious movements. The cool night air carried the faint scent of oil and rust from the surrounding industrial area. Crouching low, they made their way towards a cluster of bushes closer to the warehouse. Through the binoculars, Darius could now make out details that were previously obscured. The warehouse door was partially open, allowing glimpses of the activity inside. Bikers moved back and forth, their leather vests adorned with the now familiar Hellmask insignia. "They're unloading something from those sports bags," Darius whispered to Malik. "Looks like packages. White substance, probably drugs." Malik's jaw clenched. "Just like we suspected. This is big, Darius. Bigger than just a local gang causing trouble." As they watched, a biker approached the warehouse door, his hand reaching for the handle. Darius and Malik exchanged a worried glance. If the door closed, they'd lose their view of the illegal activities inside. "We need to," Darius began, but was cut off by the voice of the 911 dispatcher in his ear. "Mr. Carter, police units are approaching your location. Please stay put and wait for backup. Do not attempt to engage the suspects." Darius relayed this information to Malik in a hushed tone. "We should hold our position," he said, though the words felt bitter in his mouth. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to stop the criminals before they could escape. Malik nodded reluctantly. "You're right, we're not on an official mission here. We can't risk compromising the police operation." But even as they agreed to stay put, fate had other plans. The biker at the door paused, his head turning in their direction. Darius's blood ran cold as he realized their whispered conversation, and the crackle of the phone must have carried in the still night air. The biker's eyes widened as he spotted them. Without a word, he darted inside the warehouse, slamming the door behind him. Malik hissed, "They've made us!" Darius's mind raced. "We can't let them escape. If they flee now, we might lose our only chance to bring them down." The 911 dispatcher's voice came through again, urging them to stay hidden, but Darius knew they were out of time. He turned to Malik, his expression grim. "We need to block their exit," he said. "Use your car, I'll cover you." Malik hesitated for a split second, then nodded. He handed the gun to Darius. "Be careful, brother." As Malik sprinted back towards the car, Darius moved closer to the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear shouts and the revving of motorcycle engines from inside. They were preparing to flee. Suddenly, the warehouse door burst open. Crusher, Rat, and several other Hellmask riders poured out, their faces a mixture of anger and panic. In the center of the group, protected by his men, was Axel Red Thornton himself. Darius raised the gun, his finger steady on the trigger. "Freeze!" he shouted, his voice ringing out in the night air. "U.S. Marines, don't move!" For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then chaos erupted. The world exploded into motion as the Hellmask riders reacted to Darius's command. Some froze, hands instinctively raising, while others reached for weapons concealed beneath their leather vests. Axel Red Thornton, the imposing leader, barked orders to his men, his eyes scanning for an escape route. In that moment of hesitation, Malik's car screeched into view, blocking the main exit from the warehouse yard. The Hellmask riders' escape route was cut off, at least for their vehicles. The 911 dispatcher's voice crackled urgently in Darius's ear. "Mr. Carter, police units are less than 5 minutes out. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage." But Darius knew they couldn't wait. If the Hellmask riders scattered now, all their efforts would be for nothing. He had to keep them contained until the police arrived. Darius kept his gun trained on the group before him. "On the ground now. Hands where I can see them." His military training kicked in, his voice steady and authoritative as he addressed the bikers. Some of the Hellmask riders, clearly unnerved by the presence of a Marine, began to comply, but others, emboldened by their numbers, started to advance on Darius. Crusher, his face twisted in a snarl, took a menacing step forward. "You're out of your depth, soldier boy. This ain't no training ground." Darius stood his ground, his aim unwavering. "You're right, it's not. It's my home, and I won't let you destroy it." Just then, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Relief flooded through Darius, but he knew the next few moments would be crucial. The Hellmask riders, realizing they were cornered, grew more agitated. Axel Red Thornton pushed his way to the front of the group, his eyes locked on Darius. "You've made a big mistake, Marine," he growled. "This is bigger than you know." Before Darius could respond, one of the bikers made a break for it, darting towards a gap between the warehouses. Without thinking, Darius fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the night, freezing everyone in place. "Nobody move!" Darius shouted, his voice carrying over the wail of the approaching sirens. In that moment of stillness, the first police cars rounded the corner, followed by 5 more, their lights painting the scene in flashes of red and blue. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, quickly taking control of the situation. Darius lowered his gun, relief washing over him as he watched the Hellmask riders being handcuffed and led away. Malik jogged up to him, a grin on his face despite the tension of the moment. "We did it, brother," Malik said, clapping Darius on the shoulder. "We actually did it." As the adrenaline began to fade, Darius felt the weight of what they'd accomplished settle over him. They had taken on the Hellmask riders and won. But as he watched Axel Thornton being led to a police car, the biker's words echoed in his mind. "This is bigger than you know." The night air was thick with the scent of burnt rubber and gasoline, the tension of the earlier confrontation still lingering like an aftershock. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the darkened streets, their glow reflecting off shattered glass and scuffed pavement. Darius exhaled, rolling his shoulders, but he couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at his gut. They had won tonight, taken down 8 bikers, including Crasher, Rat, and Axel, but this wasn't the end. The war for Hollowbrook Heights was still far from over. He turned, scanning the scene as the police worked. Officers moved through the area with measured efficiency, speaking in hushed tones, while the investigation team combed through every inch of the site, bagging evidence and marking key points of interest. Flashlights flickered across the pavement, illuminating the aftermath of the chaos. One of the officers, a tall man with a weathered face, approached Darius and Malik. He gave them a curt nod. "You two did good tonight," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "But we'll need your statements back at the station." Darius nodded, his expression unreadable. This wasn't just about filing paperwork. It was about making sure the motorcycle gang faced real consequences for their criminal actions. He and Malik got into their vehicle and trailed the police cars heading toward the precinct. The police station buzzed with activity as Darius and Malik gave their statements. Officers moved back and forth, processing the arrested Hellmask riders and cataloguing evidence seized from the warehouse. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of cigarette smoke drifting in from outside. Darius sat across from a detective, recounting the events of the day for what felt like the 100th time. His voice was hoarse from talking, his body aching from the strain of the confrontation. "So, let me get this straight," the detective said, leaning back in his chair. "You two decided to take on a notorious biker gang by yourselves, without any official sanction or backup?" Darius met the detective's gaze steadily. "We had no choice. Didn't you see how much the neighborhood was suffering, and it seemed like nothing was being done about it? I filed my statement today, but I doubt it will make much difference in the end." The detective sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I understand you were trying to help, but this kind of vigilante action is extremely dangerous. You could have gotten yourselves killed, or worse, compromised an ongoing investigation." Before Darius could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. A group of officers had entered, led by a man whose face Darius recognized from his research the night before. Lucas Turner, also known as Smoke, in the biker community. Turner's eyes scanned the room, landing on Darius and Malik. He approached them, his expression unreadable. "You must be the Marines I've heard so much about," Turner said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm Detective Lucas Turner. I've been working the Hellmask Riders case for the past year." Darius stood, extending his hand. "Darius Carter, this is Malik Jones. We're just trying to protect our community, sir." Turner shook their hands, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, you certainly stirred up a hornet's nest. Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into?" Before Darius could answer, Turner led them to a more private area of the station. Once they were alone, his demeanor changed, becoming more serious. "What you did tonight, it's put a lot of things in motion," Turner said. "The Hellmask Riders aren't just some local gang. They're connected with other drug-dealing biker gangs." Darius and Malik exchanged glances. This confirmed their suspicions, but hearing it from a detective made it all the more real. "So why hasn't more been done to stop them?" Malik asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Turner sighed heavily. "It's complicated. We've been building a case trying to take down the entire network, but it's delicate work. One wrong move and they scatter, making it nearly impossible to track them all down." Darius leaned forward, his eyes intense. "With all due respect, sir, while you've been building your case for a year, our neighborhood has been suffering just as long. People are living in fear. Just last night they torched our car and now our neighbors are talking about moving away. Something had to be done." Turner nodded slowly. "I understand your frustration, and I have to admit, your actions tonight have given us an opportunity we might not have had otherwise. But it's also alerted other parts of the network. They'll be on high alert now." As they continued to discuss the situation, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than Turner was letting on. The detective's knowledge of the biker community seemed too intimate, his understanding of their operations too detailed. "Detective Turner," Darius said carefully, "in my research I came across some interesting information. Photos of you wearing Hellmask Riders colors. Care to explain that?" Turner's expression hardened for a moment before he let out a dry chuckle. "You've done your homework, I'll give you that. Yes, I've gone undercover with the Riders in the past. It's how we've gathered most of our intelligence on their operations." Malik leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "And we're just supposed to take your word for that?" Turner met their gazes steadily. "I understand your suspicion, but I assure you everything I've done has been in service of bringing down this organization. Sometimes to catch a criminal, you have to think like one." As the conversation continued, Darius found himself torn. On one hand, Turner's explanation made sense. On the other, years of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about this situation didn't sit right. As they prepared to leave the station, Turner pulled Darius aside. "You did good work tonight, Carter, but be careful. This isn't over, not by a long shot. The Hellmask Riders have a long memory and they don't forgive easily." Darius nodded, the weight of Turner's words settling heavily on his shoulders. As he and Malik left the station, stepping out into the cool night air, he knew that their fight for Hollowbrook Heights was far from over. The streetlights cast long shadows as they walked to Malik's car. The events of the day played through Darius's mind, each moment a piece of a larger puzzle he was still trying to solve. "What do you think?" Malik asked as they climbed into the car. "About Turner, I mean." Darius was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "I think there's more to this story than we're being told. Otherwise it wouldn't make sense that the police did almost nothing for a year now. But for now we've done what we can. Let's head home. Monique's probably worried sick." The car pulled away from the curb, heading back towards Hollowbrook Heights. The neighborhood that had seemed so threatened just hours ago now felt different. There was hope in the air, a sense that change was possible. But as they drove through the quiet streets, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Hellmask Riders had been dealt a blow, but the war for the soul of Hollowbrook Heights was far from over. As Malik's car wound its way through the darkened streets of Hollowbrook Heights, Darius's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Monique's name flashed on the screen, and he answered quickly, his voice softening as he spoke to his wife. "Darius, thank God." Monique's relief was palpable even through the phone. "Are you okay? What happened?" "I'm fine, honey," Darius assured her, his eyes scanning the familiar houses passing by outside the car window. "It's been quite a day. We're on our way home now. Is everything all right there?" There was a pause, and then Darius heard what sounded like a chorus of voices in the background. "Actually," Monique said, a hint of excitement in her voice, "while I was at the Fredericks house, we've managed to... well, everyone here, you should see for yourself. Can you stop by here first?" Curious and a little concerned, Darius agreed. As they pulled up to the Fredericks house, both men were surprised to see several cars parked along the street and lights blazing from every window of the modest home. They approached the front door cautiously, years of training making them wary of unexpected gatherings. But as soon as Monique opened the door, Darius's tension melted away. The living room was packed with familiar faces, neighbors, friends, all wearing expressions of concern and hope. "What's all this?" Darius asked as Monique pulled him into a tight embrace. Mr. Frederick took a step forward, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "When we heard the news about Mr. Henderson, we couldn't just stay at home and do nothing. Everyone came together, agreeing it was safer to stick together. We've been gathering and documenting our testimonies, every one of us," Mrs. Frederick added. "We'll make sure those bikers don't come back." Darius scanned the room, his gaze falling on the familiar faces of his neighbors. He noticed a camera set up in one of the bedrooms, likely where they had recorded their testimonies. These were people he'd known for years, all of them living under the oppressive fear of the Hellmask Riders. But now there was something different. He could see a glimmer of hope in their eyes, a tentative optimism slowly replacing the fear. "Is it true?" Mrs. Johnson from down the street asked, her voice quavering slightly. "Did you really take down those awful bikers?" Darius exchanged a glance with Malik before addressing the room. "We didn't do it alone," he said carefully. "The police were involved, and there's still a lot of work to be done, but yes, we dealt the Hellmask Riders a significant blow tonight." A cheer went up from the gathered neighbors, the sound of hope and relief filling the small living room. As Darius and Malik recounted the events of the day, carefully omitting some of the more dangerous details, he could see the change in his neighbor's demeanor. The fear that had hung over Hollowbrook Heights for so long was beginning to lift. "You've given us hope," Mr. Frederick said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "For the first time in months, I feel like we might actually have a chance at reclaiming our neighborhood." As the impromptu gathering continued, Darius found himself drawn into conversations with neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years. Stories were shared of the Hellmask Riders' intimidation tactics, of families who had fled the neighborhood, of dreams put on hold out of fear. But now there was talk of the future, of community watch programs, of renovating the old park, of bringing life back to the streets of Hollowbrook Heights. Amidst the buzz of conversation, Monique pulled Darius aside, her eyes searching his face. "Are you really okay?" she asked softly. "You're not pushing yourself too hard with your injury, are you?" Darius smiled, touched by her concern. "I'm fine," he assured her. "A little sore, but nothing I can't handle. How about you? Did you remember to take your medication?" Monique nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I did. Thank you for remembering. You know, with everything that's happened, I almost forgot about my checkup tomorrow." "We'll go together," Darius said firmly. "After today, I think we both could use a little normalcy." As the night stretched on, the gathering gradually began to wind down. Neighbors filtered out, each leaving with a renewed sense of purpose. They made plans to meet again, determined to submit their recorded testimonies to the police and to join forces in rebuilding their community. Darius, Monique, and Malik were among the last to leave, helping the Fredericks tidy up. As they said their goodbyes, Mr. Frederick pulled Darius aside. "Thank you," the older man said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you've done, it means more than you know. You've given us our home back." Darius felt a lump form in his throat. This was why he had joined the Marines in the first place, to protect people, to make a difference. He never imagined he'd be doing it in his own backyard. As they walked back to Malik's car, the cool night air felt different somehow. Fresher, full of possibility. Darius looked up at the stars, barely visible through the glow of the streetlights, and felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fight wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, he knew. The Hellmask riders wouldn't go down without a fight, and there were still questions about Detective Turner and the true extent of the biker gang's influence. But for now, in this moment, Darius allowed himself to feel the victory. Hollowbrook Heights had taken its first step towards reclaiming its streets, its safety, its soul. As Malik's car pulled away from the curb, heading towards Darius and Monique's home, the Marine couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. For the first time since he'd returned home, Darius felt truly at peace. He was exactly where he needed to be, fighting for what mattered most: his family, his neighbors, his community. The war for Hollowbrook Heights was far from over, but tonight they had won a crucial battle, and that was enough to kindle a flame of hope that would light their way forward.